Was this the most war-torn period in Chinese history? The Three Kingdoms was a period in Chinese history when the country was ruled not as a single kingdom, but by the three kingdoms of Cao Wei, Shu Han, and the Eastern Wu from 220 through to 280 AD, following the end of the previous ruling dynasty, the Han. The chaotic infighting from 184 until 220 saw the gradual collapse of Han authority as differing warlords sought control, first by Cao Wei in 220, which led to a comparatively stable period between the three kingdoms of Cao Wei, Shu Han, and Eastern Wu until around 263. This period of stability ended with the conquest of Shu by Wei in that year. This was followed by the usurpation of Cao Wei by Jin in 266 and finally the conquest of Wu by Jin in the year 280. While this era is listed as one of comparative stability, the latter years of the Han dynasty, together with the Three Kingdoms, was also one of the bloodiest eras in Chinese history. The Jin dynasty emerged in 280 AD and a nationwide census was taken. The population was only a fraction of what had been recorded during the Han dynasty. There were significant technological advances made in the roughly 6 decades of the Three Kingdoms, including the wooden ox, an early form of a wheelbarrow, improvements to the repeating crossbow, and a hydraulic-powered mechanical puppet theatre designed for Emperor Ming of Wei. Irrigation pumps were designed for gardens in Luoyang, and the south-pointing chariot, a non-magnetic directional compass, was created using differential gears. The Three Kingdoms period has been romanticized and retold in folklore, opera, and novels, with the most famous of these being the fictional historical novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms, written by Luo Guanzong during the Ming Dynasty. Brief timeline of the Three Periods era. There is no definite set timeline, as events often overlapped, although the majority of historians list the era as being from 220 to 280. The year 220 saw the abdication of the final Han emperor, and 280 was the reunification of China by the first emperor of the Jin dynasty. It could be interpreted as being even shorter, from the proclamation of the Eastern Wu ruler in 229 through to the downfall of the Shu Han in 263, while other historians look back further into history and the Yellow Turban Rebellion of 184 AD. This has a little more credibility, as Emperor Shao of Han was deposed by Dongzhuo the year after the aforementioned rebellion, when Dongzhuo sacked the city of Luoyang and moved the capital to Chang'an in the year 190. Further claims as to the beginning of this era also point to the emperor being under the control of Cao Cao in the year 196. Yellow Turban Rebellion. In 105 AD, the political power and economy of the Eastern Han fell into decline. This was largely due to a series of Han emperors ascending to power while still in their childhood, with imperial power resting upon older relatives. Often, when the youthful emperors reached maturity, these governing relatives were loath to give up the power they had attained and used their influence for political alliances with senior officials and eunuchs to effectively continue controlling the government. Political infighting between imperial relatives and eunuchs in positions of power were a constant problem during this period of Chinese history. During the reigns of Emperors Huan and Ling, the dissatisfaction of the eunuchs' usurpation of power reached a breaking point when several leading officials openly protested against the eunuchs. The first two protests ended in failure and led to the court eunuchs persuading the emperor to have several protesting scholars executed. However, some local rulers began to exert despotic control over their lands and the citizens under their control, leading many in fear of speaking out against the oppressive political climate of that time. The reigns of the two emperors mentioned at the beginning of this paragraph were recorded as being particularly dark periods of the latter Han dynasty. In addition to the political climate, China experienced several natural disasters during this turbulent period, and local rebellions sprung up across the country. In the spring of 184, Zhang Jiao, a leader of a Taoist movement known as the Way of Supreme Peace, led a rebellion against the government. Together with his two brothers, Zhang Liang and Zhang Bao, the Yellow Turban Rebellion quickly gathered followers as hundreds of thousands joined the revolt from across China. In a short period of time, they had 36 bases across the country, with the larger bases having in excess of 10,000 or more, with several smaller bases having 6,000 to 7,000 in number and were equal in size to the Han armies which were sent out to quell the uprising. At this point in history, the novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms began its narrative. While the Yellow Turbans were eventually defeated, its survivors were dispersed throughout China and continued to operate as bandits, particularly in mountainous areas, and continuing to contribute to the turmoil of that era. With the large numbers of bandits sporadically roaming the countryside, the Han army was unable to repel every raid. In 188, Emperor Ling accepted a suggestion from Liu Yan that granted direct administrative power to local governors that gave them additional power. This move theoretically gave provinces the power to combat the rebellions, whereas in reality it gave local governors the authority to rule independently of the central government. Soon after the decree was signed, Liu Yan was promoted to governor of Yi province in what is today the Sichuan Basin. He then severed all ties with the Han imperial court. Soon after, several others followed his lead in cutting themselves off from the Han. Further power struggles. In the year 189, Emperor Ling died, and his death saw another power struggle for control of the imperial family between the leading eunuchs and officials. One of the most powerful eunuchs, Jian Shu, had devised a plan to kill Regent Marshal He Jin, a brother of the Empress Dowager, as well as replacing the Crown Prince Liu Bian with his younger brother Liu Xie, the Prince of Qianlu. However, this plan was not completed, with Liu Bian subsequently becoming Emperor Shao. He Jin then launched a plot with the warlord Yuan Shao to assassinate the 10 attendants, which was in fact a clique of 12 eunuchs led by Zhang Rang, who controlled most of the imperial court. Dong Zuo, a frontier general in Liang province, and Ding Yuan, an inspector in Bing province, were ordered by He Jin to bring soldiers to the capital to help reinforce He Jin's position of authority. On learning of the plot, the eunuchs had He Jin assassinated before Dong Zuo and the reinforcements arrived. On their arrival at the capital, the armies stormed the two palaces and killed the 10 attendants, along with another 2,000 eunuchs and their supporters. This event effectively ended the century-long feud between the imperial family and the eunuchs. With the emperor losing any remaining military or political control, Dong Zuo seized his opportunity and deposed Liu Bian from the imperial throne, replacing him with his younger brother Liu Xie. This resulted in further rebellions throughout China. In an attempt to restore the power of the Han, a coalition was formed against Dong Zuo. In 191, Sun Jian led an army against Dong Zuo, forcing him to retreat from Luoyang to Chang'an. The next year, Lu Bu, a former bodyguard to Dong Zuo, assassinated the man he was once hired to protect. the collapse of central power. In 192, coalition leaders had considered appointing Liu Yu as emperor, but they could not agree. Most were more interested in their own personal pursuit of power and the instability that caused than restoring the credibility of the Han dynasty. With the Han dynasty divided among several warlords and the eventual collapse of the central government, and the North China Plain was once again an area of warfare and anarchy as they sought that power and survival. Lu Bu, who killed Dong Zhuo, was in turn hunted by officers loyal to him as warlords turned against each other as alliances were broken, with Cao Wei finding himself in complete control of the southern part of the North China Plain. In 196, Emperor Xian found himself under the protection of Cao Wei and established his imperial court at Xuchang in today's Henan province. Cao Wei was by that time in de facto control and led the role of being loyal to the Han. Most of the smaller warlords had been by that time absorbed or destroyed by the more powerful ones, and by being closely associated with the emperor, Cao Wei had the formal authority to control the remaining warlords. In 204, after his victory at the Battle of Yi and the capture of the city of Yi, followed 3 years later by victory at the Battle of White Wolf Mountain, Cao Wei was in control of the entire North China Plain and over half the population of China. The Battle of Red Cliffs. In the year 208, Cao Wei took his army south with the intention of unifying China. After some skirmishes, Cao Wei's naval fleet and army of 200,000 were met by a much smaller army of 50,000 at Red Cliffs. The main battle began with attempts to set fire to Cao Wei's fleet after a feigned surrender by Huang Gai. The army of Cao Wei was comprehensively beaten, and he, along with his survivors, was forced to hastily retreat back to the north. The biggest factor in the defeat was the opportunity for the emergence of the states of Shu and Wu. The emergence of the three kingdoms. Cao Wei died in the first few months of 220 and was succeeded by his son Cao Pai. In December of that year, Emperor Xian abdicated and Cao Pai ascended the imperial throne, proclaiming his heavenly mandate as the Emperor of Wei. In May 221, Liu Bei proclaimed himself as the Emperor of Han, his state generally becoming known as Shu Han. Likewise, Sun Quan was installed as the King of Wu. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, it was an era of extreme hostility and warfare, and before the year 221 had ended, Shu had invaded Wu. After numerous skirmishes, a peace alliance was brokered in the winter of 223. Shu controlled the upper Han Valley and land to the west of the Yangtze Gorges. The states of Shu and Wei were separated by the Qingling Mountains, with the Wei controlling the Wei and Wei valleys. Military sorties into Wei territory by the Wu usually ended in failure, while the Wu controlled most of the Yangtze Valley. The decline of the three kingdoms, beginning with the fall of Shu. From the year 258, the political situation in Shu Han was under the authority of a corrupt eunuch named Huang Hao. And 5 years later, the Wei armies, seeing the political situation, launched a devastating attack on Yinping, then Jianga, through mountainous terrain previously considered impassable. By 264, the capital, Chengdu, had fallen, and the emperor, Liu Shan, was forced to surrender. Thus, the state of Shu ended after 43 years. The fall of Wei. In the state of Wei, there was an increase in the tension between two of the leading family clans from the late 230s, the Shao clan and the Sima. The Cao placed their own supporters in the most important posts and often excluded those connected to their rivals. The Sima clan was one of the most powerful landowning families of the Han dynasty. One of those, Sima Yi, was considered a dangerous threat. Sima Yi was a very capable military strategist and politician and had been instrumental in some military victories for the Wei Cao. In the year 238, Sima Yi crushed a rebellion organized by Gongsun Yuan of the self-proclaimed Yang Kingdom, and in doing so he outmaneuvered the local ruler Cao Shuang in a play of power which ultimately forced Cao Shuang from his position of authority. There were protests against the power of the Sima family, one of those from the 7 sages of the bamboo grove. One of those sages, Shi Han, was later executed as part of a purge following the downfall of Cao Shuang. Cao Han succeeded to the throne in 260, but plots from the Sima clan soon followed, with their leader Sima Yan leading the unrest to become the emperor. Sima Yan seized the throne in 266 after Cao Yuan decided his best course was to abdicate. This effectively overthrew the Wei dynasty and was the first step for the succeeding dynasty, the Jin. Coincidentally, a similar situation 40 years earlier saw Cao Pai ascending to the throne after the abdication of Emperor Xian of Han. The fall of Wu. The state of Wu had been in steady decline since the early 250s, and when Sima Yan overthrew the Wei Emperor in 266 to proclaim the Jin dynasty, it ended 46 years of Cao Wei domination in the north. When Emperor Sun Shi of Wu died, his son, Sun Hao, became the new leader of Wu. Upon ascension, he became a tyrant and killed or exiled anyone who dared to oppose him in the royal court. The Jin began preparing to invade from 269, although it would be another 10 years before the plan was put into action. 5 simultaneous attacks were planned along the Yangtze from present-day Nanjing to Jiangling when a fleet from Sichuan sailed to Jing province. The Wu forces collapsed under the attacks in the early spring of 280. Sun Hao was allowed to live the remainder of his life after he surrendered, as this event marked the end of the 3 Kingdoms period and 3 centuries of disunity in China. Conflicting theories on population decline. This was a prolonged period of warfare and unrest, yet questions have arisen as to the estimated population figures for this time and the accuracy of these numbers. After the Yellow Turban Rebellion, there was a serious famine that occurred across the central plains of China. And adding to this, when Dong Zhuo was in power, he gave his army the authority to loot and plunder the population, including abducting women for the reason of forced marriages, servants, or as consorts. A scorched earth policy was enacted that compelled the entire population of Luoyang to move to Chang'an. All the palaces, temples, official residences, and homes were to be burnt, and no one should stay within 200 li. A li was around 500 meters in length. Considering the hardships of many of the population at that time, this was impossible to be achieved, and cries of discontent arose as Luoyang's population decreased sharply, according to later historians. When Cao Cao launched his attack on Shu province, it was reported that hundreds of thousands were buried alive. Even livestock was unable to survive. The Si River was blocked and 5 towns were unable to recover from the lack of water supply. When the army of Li Jie attacked the Guangzhou area where hundreds of thousands lived, after plundering the cities of their people, there was nothing left on which those that remained could survive. The above reports were not records of actual events, mere speculation written by historians decades or more after the events. The population of the Jin dynasty, which followed the Three Kingdoms period, was reportedly only 35.3% of that of the earlier Eastern Han. Yet at the time of the Three Kingdoms, the recorded population of Shu was just 900,000, but their military was over 100,000 in number, according to the records of the Three Kingdoms, with such a high percentage of its population in the military. The recorded numbers were likely to have been much less than the actual numbers, as census figures and tax records were often collated together. Usually, those evading paying the taxes were not included in the population figures. Other discrepancies in actual figures included slaves, including prisoners of war, who were also not included in those numbers. While it is clear that warfare took many lives during the Three Kingdoms period, the claim that tens of millions were wiped out can easily be questioned, even when factors such as famine and infectious diseases are taken into account. The legacy of the Three Kingdoms in popular culture. There are several Chinese legends that are centered on the people and affairs of this relatively short period of Chinese history. The most complete and influential of these is the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, written during the Ming Dynasty by Luo Guangzhong. It is possible that the popularity of this historical novel, the Three Kingdoms period of history, is so well known in Chinese culture through its use of iconic characters, their exploits and deeds. Based on the novel, there are numerous other books, television dramas, movies, cartoons, anime, games, and even music based on this era and continue to be produced regularly throughout China and elsewhere in East Asia. That is all for this video. If you have enjoyed watching and it has shown you a little detail of life here in China, then your subscribing to my channel would mean a lot to me. Thank you for watching. Make sure you click on the link. To the next video, and until the next time, goodbye for now.